You did not wake up one morning within 1 month and get the condition of hypothyroidism or PCOS or a hormonal imbalance. Neither did you even become obese overnight. There was a time, doctor, when I used to see PCOS cases 25 and above. That's when it... Now, PCOS cases are 13 and above.
I think you described the future health problems that we are going to face.
Yeah.
And how we constructed that system that you're going to really fight gravity to come out of this challenge.
So when we look at PCOS actually in my practice, about 60 to 70% is insulin resistance of the female reproductive system, which is food driven and exercise driven.
It's so interesting that even though I want to discuss about nutrition and we are discussing about circadian rhythm and the stress coping mechanism and having time for yourself and having the routine.
Yeah. Fixing circadian rhythm. This is a big one.
We have an overwhelming amount of information on food and diet. But still, so many of us feel confused about how to eat right. In today's episode, I am joined by Sangeeta Iyer, a nutritionist who has spent years helping people untangle the web of misinformation around nutrition. We dive into the myths that shape our everyday choices, the cultural and emotional patterns behind our eating habits, and why quick fix diets often do more harm than good. This conversation shines a light on how we can return to food as nourishment, not stress, and create a relationship with eating that is rooted in clarity and balance. Hope you enjoy this episode. And now we go over to Sangeeta. So Sangeeta Iyer, finally, thank you for coming to Ayurvedic Healing and Beyond podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been a wait, Dr. Vignesh, but it's my pleasure to be here.
So Sangeeta, we have been wanting to have this conversation about nutrition and health. And after following your work, I realized that a lot of nutritional myths, misunderstandings, and we get a lot of junk information, misinformation.
Yes.
So I would like to explore these areas with you today.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead.
Now, when I spoke to you first, you mentioned that a lot of conditions like PCOS, hormonal conditions, even some of the autoimmune conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, all of this comes to you. Now, imagine if the patient who's going through this doesn't have an access to a doctor, like a gynec or a medical professional, and they just have access to a nutrition. Would you say that will help them a lot?
Depends on the severity of the condition. Let's be very honest. Because nutrition and lifestyle, it doesn't play out in negative terms also overnight. It will not create a positive impact also overnight. What do I mean by that? You did not wake up one morning within 1 month and get the condition of hypothyroidism or PCOS or a hormonal imbalance. Neither did you even become obese overnight. Similarly, it's not going to go away in 3 months, right? So that's point number one. We need to understand that any nutrition lifestyle intervention is a slow process because you abused the body long enough for the body to show up like that, right? Now, there are certain, in almost actually 50-60% of the time, an intervention by your nutrition and lifestyle practitioner can help. But there are conditions when that is not enough. I'll tell you where. When, for example, if fertility is becoming an issue in the case of PCOS. PCOS and PCOD also, doctor, I'm sure you know, they lie on a spectrum.
Yes.
It can start with as simple as regular period but weight gain and showing signs of male hair growth pattern and fatigue, hirsutism, correct. That. It can show up as irregularity in period, but yet you may be fertile and you have ovulation. Then it can go up to the fact that your ovulation is questionable. Is it happening? Not happening. So it depends on the spectrum and a gynecologist has to evaluate that, right? So where you are on your spectrum, what is your age? And for example, are you planning to conceive? Let's say you have a history of PCOS and you're 33 years old and you want to start a family. Nutrition is not the only, you should be looking at that, but that's not the only thing. Similarly, in the case of hypothyroidism, one of the things that I will never say is do not take medication. In fact, in hypothyroidism, it is almost essential that you visit your endocrinologist and take the necessary medication for thyroid, because otherwise your hormones can get really, it's one of the key hormones that regulate metabolism, right? So even when people they just get fed up and say, I randomly reduced my dosage, or somebody told me, no, if I do this, don't do that. Your body has to heal, the blood markers has to show, your doctor has to tell you what dosage you have to take, what dosage you can drop. There are parameters for that, right? So I don't think so. In most cases, when your borderline TSH is elevated, in fact, even doctors will send you back saying, this is subclinical. You can,
borderline.
Yeah, borderline, subclinical. You can handle this with lifestyle intervention. Most cases, they'll tell you, eat right, lose weight, exercise, manage your sleep, which is what we do in nutrition and lifestyle intervention. So like I said, it depends on the spectrum, where you are at, how severe it is. But one thing I'll tell you, pharmaceutical intervention and medical intervention without nutrition and lifestyle intervention will only put a band-aid. It will show up in some form later or in some way. So it's better, depending upon where you're at, once your doctor has definitely analyzed it and diagnosed it, they work together. Which will play a more important role depends on where you are.
I think the future of healthcare has to come to a stage where we give equal importance to both nutrition,
100%.
lifestyle, and the band-aid that we talk about. Otherwise, it's just pressing the snooze button. It's going to keep coming. That alarm is going to come back again.
Correct.
Now, let's talk about that nutritional intervention. Now, we see, you're just talking about PCOS and PCOD and also hypothyroidism. Now, you also mentioned the disease just doesn't show up like that.
Overnight.
Somewhere we have contributed, and then there was a lot of work behind in creating what it was. Like they say, Rome was not built in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about what would they have done to reach here. And now what can we do to reverse this from your nutritional perspective, and how do you guide your clients in that way?
So typically what we see in women, especially because we're talking PCOS and hypothyroidism, they almost always occur together because the entire endocrine system is like a dance. Typically, you will see that if one is not good, there are a couple of other hormones that also are out of balance, right? So I think at the what I call the lowest hanging fruit is, and especially last 20, 30 years, food, definitely there is a problem in how we eat. Okay. And I'll keep the what we eat at home separate. But most definitely, if you see the cases, there was a time, doctor, when I used to see PCOS cases 25 and above. That's when it... Now, PCOS cases are 13 and above. That is as young, which basically means within 1 or 2 years of menarche beginning in, the imbalance is already setting in, which is very alarming, right? So one is obviously food going wrong. And when I say food going wrong, I mean, this is a no-brainer. The proportion of ultra-processed food which is forming a part of our daily diet today is completely lopsided and doesn't work for us. Okay? Like the indulgence of little things like chips and murku and biscuits and even what you may perceive as totally healthy, baked nachos or not necessarily fried. Okay? So that is like open the pantry of any household today. One of the 3 to 5 items or 3 items out of the 5 items I've told you are there today. Okay. The second thing that has interestingly happened is, and there was our own, I think the ICMR or some other study that said it, that when Indians' purchasing power increases and therefore disposable income increase, we go towards buying a little more processed and ultra processed food. So the minute I moved from, let's say, low middle class to middle class, now the kid says, I want to go to McDonald's. And the parents find it aspirational to take their kids to a McDonald's. Now the kid says, now the kid says, oh, I want to go to the food, the game zone in the mall. Along with the gaming zone in the mall, there is a food court. And that food largely is ultra-processed, high-calorie dense food, right? Yeah. So this unfortunately, this upgradation which is in one way, which is very welcome because our socio-economic status is improving. But what research shows that, let's say a house has a 4,000 calorie budget, 70% of those calories are actually going towards ultra-processed food. And fruits and vegetables and nuts and that proportion of calories is decreasing.
Okay.
Right? This is point number 2. So this itself, I think, makes up to 50-60% of the problem because food is something that you eat every single day, 3 times a day. Right? So parents are getting affluent. They want to provide more opportunity to their children. All these things like eating out. I mean, I remember in my childhood, eating out was probably once in 2 months. A samosa and ice cream came once in 3 months. And, when we used to end our quarterly exam, you took 50 rupees and you went. Now it's a weekly affair, if not a daily affair. Advent of food delivery apps and quick commerce. So you think it is there in your doorstep. There is no barrier. Earlier, there was some barrier. Okay, so this is the food part. Along with this, simultaneously, especially in girls, what's happening is the amount of time that was dedicated to play, that has gradually come down. And that is again for a variety of reasons. At the base level, I will tell you that we need to do better with our infrastructure. Like, where do you send your girls to play? Like, that could be a larger societal issue we are dealing with when you look at various socio-economic groups, right? So, play, which used to be, especially after 8th, 9th class, where in school you will have like a 3-hour duration in 1 week PT period. And I remember in my school, that time also there are certain girls who will make some excuse and go and sit under the tree. Yeah. I remember the teacher would come running with a stick saying, no, go, run, play, do something. So that play is so important between that age of 6, 7 to keep when puberty is hitting, right? So this play, I don't know how much it is happening now in schools. It used to be 3 to 4 hours when I was studying. That playtime after school now at home is not there.
Yeah.
Now the focus is more on go do this AI course, go do that coding, go do this abacus. It's all gone in that direction. So typically what used to happen when you were at least till 10th, okay, you would come back, you would wash your face, etc. You'd have a snack, little bit. You'd go down wherever you were or in your colony, you'd play 2-3 hours. You'd come back, your mom would be screaming at you. You'll take a shower, you'll finish your homework, you'll eat. So every day, irrespective, you had 2 hours of, and I'm not talking structured. This was all unstructured play, if you remember.
Yeah.
Go out, you play whatever local game, you run around, right? Now, this has gone away. Now, simultaneously, distraction with screen. So, every play is now digitized. Yes. And thanks to COVID, even education got digitized. Right? So, the amount of screen time between probably now usage of computers, etc., even if kids are going back to school, college, etc., and then coming back, the entire entertainment is in front of a screen. So physical activity is missing. And uniquely what happens in India, unlike in the West or Europe, sports is not part of our culture. Again, this is men and women. Children rarely have seen their parents exercise or have ever seen their grown-up parent spend 1 hour a day in playing badminton or whatever. If they're very lucky, they'll have... But all their dads will scream and watch cricket on the screen. Not a single dad will go on a Sunday and play a match. Very few. Okay. So after 10th, our society and our middle class or upper middle class is built such that after 10th, now you have exam pressure. This entrance exam, 10th board, 12th board. Whatever little that you could have done as physical activity is gone. So in the critical puberty years of, let's say, 10, 11 to 18, when you're becoming an adult, this physical activity, unless you have a parent or unless the kid goes and really does it, there is no support, encouragement, or even a recognition that this is missing. Then if you turn around and say, now my 14-year-old is having pre-diabetes in boys and my 15-year-old is having PCOS and weight gain, obviously it will be. Now let's add a third layer, which is a very new problem, a very Gen Z and a generation beyond that, anxiety. Mental health issues coming out of social media, coming out of... it's not like this whole screens and media putting pressure on men and women. It was there earlier. We also used to face it in the form of television. But television had a certain time and a structure. That pressure could happen only between 8 and 9. Now it is 24/7. Okay? So this is constant comparison, constant... and what you're seeing on social media is, like I say, it's just the reel of their life. It's not the real life, right? It's like a show reel. So all these anxiety problems, not having play, not having social skills, like 5 real friends outside. And this is a very real, true problem in urban India with girls. They don't... 5 friends that they socialize with beyond Instagram and whatever have you. All that is giving rise to anxiety. And that all this plays into the third part that we see a lot is stress. So when we look at PCOS, actually in my practice, about 60 to 70% is insulin resistance of the female reproductive system, which is food driven and exercise driven. Okay. The second part is what we call lean PCOS. This is about almost 10 to 15%. Where the girl, the young child or the girl is actually lean. There is no problem. If you do her HOMA IR, everything is fine. Her eating is not very haywire, but stress. Could be exam stress, performance stress, some other kind of anxiety that we don't know. So that's typically when we do stress management with them. And most of the case, this lean PCOS girls are academically very high performing girls. So they want to do IIT and they're constantly in a room studying. Then about 10% of the cases, which most gynecologists will also agree, that there is usually no diagnosis, like there is no explanation. It could be genetic. It could be a history of maybe very poor nutrition in your childhood. We see this in slightly the marginal community, where probably, from childhood, the nutrition was not great, not poor. So you see PCOS in such cases. So this is my analysis of what I'm seeing happening so far.
I think you described the future health problems that we are going to face.
Yeah.
And how we constructed that system that you're going to really fight gravity to come out of this pattern.
Yeah. Very recently, I had the parents of a girl giving her 12th board and also studying for IIT come to me. She was almost 30 kgs overweight and extreme PCOS and her insulin resistance and very poor, very carbohydrate-centric nutrition. So I tried to advise them. I actually told them, if you want this, and she just didn't have time. She's going to college, she's coming back, she's studying. I said, if need be, take a drop year. Resolve her health. 1 year, when you're 30s and 40s, when you look back at your teens, 1 drop year is not going to... I said, please take a drop year, because with what she is eating and watching... She while studying in the night, she'll eat chips. We can't tell her. She gets upset. Can we give banana chips? You know what I mean? So I actually told them, no matter what I'm going to tell you, it's not going to work, because that girl is sitting in one place and studying for 18 hours and doing nothing else. So, but when I told, take a drop year, they said, what are you talking? So they look at the priorities. So... yes, if I would say academics can wait 6 months, 1 year, sort the health. You can always catch up on academics and work. It's not a big deal.
That's why I always say, if it costs you your health, it's not worth it.
It's not worth it. Because imagine this is at 17. Already, like this parents explained to me, already she's become very introverted. Obviously, you have a 30 kg weight problem. So the world is not easy. You feel awkward. Plus all this Instagram and social media is showing you unreal images. Then you're cooped up in a room and studying only. You don't have any exercise, so you don't have any good hormones. Look at the ripple effect of what this does.
It all starts with having the income and exposure to ultra processed food, and the marketing gimmick is so good that
and at every price point. Like today, if I'm earning 1,000 rupees in a week, there is a product for me. If I'm earning 10,000 rupees in a week, there is a ultra processed product for me. If I'm earning 30,000, like look at the spectrum. So you get Parle-G at 5 rupees. You get a Kit Kat now at 10 rupees. Earlier, a Dairy Milk chocolate, oh my God, it was a luxury. When I was a kid, we used to do it one Sunday in a month.
It was a true luxury.
Yeah, Dairy Milk, when it came in, we were like, oh, dark chocolate. Not even dark chocolate. It's just milk chocolate. But just chocolate was a luxury.
And if you rewind the evolution of humanity back to once upon a time before sugar
became so
popular,
readily available, yeah.
You had access to something that is sweet only in seasonal fruits, or you had to climb some trees and beat some honeycomb.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Or even if you look at like my time, again, I'll tell you, I don't want to sound like a relic, but yeah, I'll be 50 very soon, in about a year. Like even access to sugary foods at home. It was one Tamil New Year, one Deepavali, one Holi, one birthday. Like I can count, even if in a month there was one festivity or one Shrad or one occasion, it will be once a month. That is only 10 instances in 365 days. Okay. And even like, for example, let's say some Bhakshanam got made, or what we call treats got made in Deepavali. It remained for exactly those 2 days. You were not eating it until New Year because there was frugality. You had joint family systems. We were 10 cousins. So that sweet treat of whatever my grandmom used to make would get distributed in that small quantity among everybody, done and finished in two days. Now every day. Unfortunately, it's an abundance problem.
Yeah, we don't have scarcity problems.
Yeah, it's an abundance problem. There is a very small section. There is a section of society in India, unfortunately, below the poverty line, where there is a scarcity and a below poverty line issue and all of that. But what we are seeing now is a big abundance problem.
I learned medicine and human body through the Ayurvedic perspective.
Yes.
And of course, I read a lot of modern physiology as well.
Correct.
So those days, like centuries ago, it was documented in Ayurveda that you can actually classify diseases broadly into 2 types. Diseases of overconsumption and diseases of malnourishment.
Yes.
Those days it was told the diseases of overconsumption is very limited to people who are close to the kings and his network.
Affluent.
If you have the blessings of the king and the top elite army, you
Yes.
will have access to a lot of things and you will be suffering with overconsumption problems.
Yes.
Those days they told, but problems of overconsumptions are much, much difficult to treat than problems of malnourishment.
Correct.
Because what is missing, you can just top it up. But once it goes inside the system,
how do you
get it out?
Correct.
And they said, as the quality of life gets better in a community, problems of overconsumption will also get worse.
Increase.
And we are seeing it today.
We are seeing that play out. Absolutely. See, there was a time, I think I was looking into some journal from England. As you rightly said, which was observed in Ayurveda, they first saw diabetes in people who were close to royalty. That's why they called it, it was the disease of affluence, diabetes, or what they call sugar diabetes, because sugar was expensive. It is not as cheap as it is today. So it was the royalty and people who were close to royalty who could eat all those sugary treats as high tea and, indulge in all of that. Today, diabetes is like,
we are the diabetic capital of the world.
It is everywhere. So yes, there is undernourished, which is a real problem.
And overfed,
undernourished. Unfortunately, and this is the one that is chronically progressive. This can be handled with a little bit of resources, public policy, awareness, a little bit of social movement. But this is a tough one. And this is a more profitable one, unfortunately.
For the economy.
For the systems that may be,
I think our economy really incentivizes you to be sick. if you look at it one perspective. But at the same time, there are some communities where it really incentivizes you to be healthy. Like, for example, when I see some countries, there, as you said, when you are going from lower class to a lower middle class middle class, people have more problems of obesity, high cholesterol, or high diabetes, these problems. But in certain communities, you cannot afford to stay sick because you have to be a high performer. So if you are putting on weight and if you are very heavy in your energy in your body, the society penalizes you to be there. So you cannot afford to be there. So you need to work out, and it's a part of your culture. They bring it in your culture that you need to do sports, you need to run, you need to be agile. And what I see in some countries...
Japan does it beautifully.
Like in some...
Singapore is doing it now.
Yeah. I think it all comes down to the public health initiatives of the...
At a scale that we have to address, and unfortunately now we have a population and there is a lot of... The scale that we have to address, it has to be a massive public health policy movement. It's not... It'll be beyond your pay grade and my pay grade to address this at a large level. There is only through content and content like these and that we can do. But systematic, like for example, what Singapore did with the grading, right? They have the color grading. More calories, more sugar. It goes from green, yellow, red, A, B, C, D, right in the front of the packet. Even in all the stalls, they have this grading system with calories. Japan starts nutritionists. They have mandated public schools to have nutritionists on board who will design a fresh meal every day for the children, and the children are told the importance of nutrition. So somebody did an experiment and went to Japan. There is this reel on social media where they asked children what their favorite food was. In Japan, one kid is saying, I like seaweed something, I like broccoli, I like sushi. They were shocked. They were like, how can such a small kid say this? But that's what they have been taught. So it starts there. But yeah, you need resources, you need intent, you need policy.
I think the point when you were saying this about Japan and this, what was coming to my mind, which I lost my train of thought, is in some countries, it takes a lot of effort and resources to stay healthy. But in some countries, it's much easier to stay healthy because the access to these unhealthy and ultra-processed food is very difficult.
Limited, yeah.
And you don't see so many McDonald's. You don't see so many of ultra-processed foods. And the walking pathways are fantastic.
Infrastructure plays a big role.
I think in India, one of the reasons, apart from the access to these ultra-processed food, is our infrastructure to walk is very poor.
Agree. Public facilities like parks, infrastructure to walk on the road. I'm sure you're now aware of the whole Delhi stray dog menace that, now there is a whole outrage going on. But imagine you try to walk in the evening or early morning and 10 dogs come chasing you. We know of cases, the pollution itself in certain cities. So yes, that is definite. Social infrastructure, public infrastructure at a mass level is a problem. But what I think is, I like to address what you can address.
Yes.
Okay.
Which
Food
is control.
What exactly? We can keep talking that the AQI is bad. Now that is not in our control. You can't leave the country and go. We can say that I can't find time to walk on the road, or the roads are not walkable. But
we are not solving it.
We are not doing anything. I say start with food. That is 70% of the problem.
So let's start with that, Sangeeta ji. How do we, we spoke about hypothyroidism. We spoke about very early onset of hormonal issues.
Yes.
So I'm sure many parents listening to this who are having their children in their 8th and 9th year and who are going to have this. Let us try to, if they are the listeners, what would you tell them?
If junk food is forming more than 5 to 10% of your overall diet, start there. That is the easiest to do. How to do this? Very simple. Sit with a diary and audit what you and your family, and trust me, if children are eating, parents are eating. Who's bringing it into the house? They are not adults yet. They don't have money. They may be creating pressure on you, but you have the control. The purse is in your hand. So you are bringing it into the house. So I always say, sit with a diary or with somewhere on your laptop, see what is your total grocery shopping.
Make an audit.
Simple. And if 10%, 8 to 10% more of this is coming from ultra processed food. And when I say ultra processed food, please be ruthless. It could be chips, it could be biscuits, it could be chivda, farsan, it could be a lot of jams, a lot of hidden things come into the house, a lot of sauces, a lot of instant noodles, a lot of bread. Okay. Now compare this. I'm not saying bread is bad. I'm not saying having 1 teaspoon of sauce is bad. I'm coming to where it is.
5 to 10%.
Exactly. And audit this with how many fruits and vegetables, what is your protein, what is the rotation of lentils and legumes in your diet, how much refined carbs is coming into your diet. Do an audit of this. If this is crossing 10%, you seriously need to examine food. Along with this, please be very honest. And I know we have double income households today, so both parents are working. Okay. See how many times, maybe because you're busy, maybe because you're tired, maybe because the kid insisted, how many times are you ordering food? This will first show you a very good blueprint on where you are at.
That will show in your blood reports.
Which will show. Fantastically said. That I used to say this, show me your grocery cart and I will tell you what is in your medicine cabinet.
That's the next level.
Yeah, that next level. If I know your shopping list, I will tell you your medicine list, okay, over a period of time. So first examine this, okay? And the easiest thing you can do is to reduce all of what I told you, okay? And increase what I call whole foods. Now, depending upon what your eating background is, whether you're a vegetarian, lacto-vegetarian, ovo-lacto-vegetarian, meat eater, right? Whatever it is, increase this. This itself will solve 50% of the problem, okay? Point number 2. Create systems in the house. And this is a little more societal family problem. Create systems in the house where everybody is equipped to cooking a little bit. Very important problem. This is, I know a lot of men will turn around and tell me, hey, even the woman is not cooking. We have a maid who's coming and cooking. But trust me, in most houses, even if a maid is coming and cooking, the onus is on the woman to constantly decide what's for breakfast, what's for lunch, what's for dinner. And one day if she decides, or if she's on a 3-day let's say break, or she's gone on a conference and the maid doesn't turn up, the next 3 days food is being ordered. The reason I'm saying this is, you will not be able to compete with the calories that come from outside food. And if this happens often because your family understanding or infrastructure is not suited, you'll find yourself going wrong. Okay. So both people in the house, and if you start having teenage kids in the house, learn them this basic skill, making a basic omelette. Okay. Or making some basic sandwich. Something basic where you don't have to go to Zomato and Swiggy and order a vada pav or a bonda or a vada or whatever. You're still eating something at home which will be calorie-wise far better and healthier.
Okay.
So this is point number 2. Usually if you set these systems in place, you will resolve a lot of discipline issues that are coming. Okay. Point number 3, set. And this is where you have young children, right? If I'm not talking about where your children are adults and all of that. That's a different ballgame. Set ground rules and boundaries as to how many times this outing will be focused on eating. Not all outings you have to eat, right? This is the other thing that we do. Because we have nothing else to do, our every outing is a eating outing. Food.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a small example. You can always have dinner at home and go and watch a movie. Like, why do you have to go watch a movie, eat that big tub of popcorn, and then eat one more meal outside and do this every week? Right? So, coming back, have some boundaries as to how many times as a family you will indulge in this outside.
What is healthy according to you?
Maximum twice a month.
Twice a month.
You don't need more than that. If a family of 4 today goes out, even once in a month, that cost is about 5,000-6,000 rupees. It's not simple. Like I'm saying, father, mother, 2 kids, which is a general family unit.
Tier 2 city easily, yes.
Easily. And I'm not even talking fancy places. You do one movie, one meal outside, you've spent 4,000 to 5,000, right?
Yes.
So the thing is, beyond this, how much do you want to spend? Like, instead, maybe utilize that extra disposable income for something else. For example, do you have a nearby gym member? Even if you don't like gym, can you find a badminton class for your kid? Okay, gym, there is such a no gym,
or a yoga class,
or can you find some dancing class, whatever it is. Can you find something else where the kid can have fun and get physically engaged? And nowadays in some cities you have this indoor studios of rock climbing and all of that. So it's a matter of what is your priority, and of course you have to put some energy. First few sessions you also have to go there, and more importantly, are you doing anything? As a parent, if you're going to sit and watch the first movie that releases, please don't expect your child to do anything different. But as a parent, if they see you go play badminton in the morning or have some routine, they will go. So these are the basics. So whole foods diet, largely at home, arresting ultra-processed consumption, getting physical activity, limiting going out. Last thing I'll tell you, not every pampering by every family member to your children needs to happen in the form of food. Okay? We have become a generation currently. So when I was growing up, it was grandparents, extended family, and cousins, parents, 2 kids. It was still expensive to go on, feed people, and like, it's a birthday, so I'll give you cake. No, because if you did it for one child, you had to do it for all other children. Today it is grandparents, affluent parents, one child. Everybody pampering that child. So there is more and more and more coming that child's way. So if you want to show love and affection, go for a walk, some trek. Come to a retreat like ours and spend some time on the beach, play a game. Spend 3 days in that retreat. Why do you want to feed everybody food and give them...
Swimming.
Go for a swim in the beach, play volleyball if you're fit. So I am saying affection, the love language. And I know one of the biggest love languages in our country is food. And sweets. Wherever you go. Change that love language, because today that child doesn't need that kind of food. It is abundance. I remember when I used to come back from school, somebody will give some prasad. My grandmother will come like this in a hand and she'll put it like this. Only this much. She says, eat quickly before everybody sees. I have not given it to them. It was that frugal, Dr. Vignesh. It's hilarious. So this is what you can do as a household for young children.
So if I have to just sum up, audit your groceries, teach and make cooking a very
basic life skill.
Like learning to walk. I think I have a lot to learn there. And then maybe going out twice a month, not more.
Yeah.
But today, this going out has become, the food is coming in. That's the thing that...
Yeah, that is the other challenge. That's why I said, learn cooking so that you limit those orders, every time at a order. I think this quick delivery has been I'm so undivided on this, Dr. Vignesh. Like, sometimes when you need something very urgently like the other day I was ordering, my son had the ball hit him very badly. So I wanted, it was some 9 in the night. So I could order the machine that warms the warm compress. Yeah. It could come in 10 minutes. When I think about it like that, it seems like a boon. But I don't think the large part of the orders is not that.
Obviously.
It's not being used for that.
I'm really curious if we can make a statistic correlation between the onset of instant food deliveries and the rise of metformin and some of the metabolic medications that are being sold.
Correct. No, I can't. See, when the food delivery apps, and not quick commerce, I'm talking about the Zomatos, and every year they declare that biryani is the highest. I am not surprised we have diabetes and indigestion issues. And I've been practicing now from Hyderabad for 2 years. So I get a lot of, since my podcast in Telugu and all of that one, I get a lot of South clients. So Hyderabad, Kerala. You know what is their addiction? Biryani. They love, whether it is a Kerala biryani, whether it is some Dindigal biryani, whether it is some whatever. There is one Tuk biryani now. It comes in a bucket. I said, are you an animal or are you a human being to eat biryani out of a bucket? And Hyderabad biryani it's a heaven.
For biryani, yes.
It's a problem. 1,500 calories in one biryani, out and done, and you chase Coke after that or thumbs up after that. So I don't think this app, so quick commerce and this, you have to be smart.
Now, we see a huge insurgence of allergies, intolerances. Now, I see a lot of patients. I mean, I always say, being an Ayurvedic doctor, I'm the doctor for the leftover patients. Because they come, I did
this, nothing worked.
Somebody told me, go try this Ayurvedic thing. And that's how many patients come. So I see a lot of irritable bowel syndrome and IBD. Now, I'm curious to know from your perspective. Do you get these patients? I'm sure, as a nutritionist.
A lot. Just like how PCOS is like a endemic problem in women, PCOS and hypothyroidism, like 1 in 3. 1 in 3 have, between both men and women, they are having some gut trouble on some spectrum of IBS and IBD. I think we have to distinguish IBS and IBD.
Let's do that.
Irritable bowels disease is slightly more severe, and in many cases it has a very clear diagnosis, which means that if you look at your blood work and you do your calprotein, if you get an endoscopy or even a colonoscopy done, you will find certain strictures. I've had these US clients who've come. Similarly with Crohn's, there is bleeding, occult stool. So there are a set parameters for this, and this is more severe. Yes. At least, while I'm not saying it is good to have any, but at least here there is a diagnosis. This is the problem. I have to get these tests done and I have to sort my nutrition, etc. Unfortunately, and this is a smaller set in my case, smaller, right? IBD. But the 80% is IBS where everything is normal, which means colonoscopy normal, you don't have any ulcers in your stomach, you maybe have a light stomach inflammation in the lining, your endoscopy is normal, but you're just on multiple rounds of NSAIDs and PPIs and laxatives, and it just ruins your quality of life and gut health. Now, this can range from something as simple as acidity, acid reflux, burn in the upper abdomen, pain, cramps, bloating, malabsorption, weight loss, diarrhea, constipation. I mean, I'm sure you see all. And this is 1 in 3, men and women. Normally, just like they come to you, they will come to me after at least minimum of 2 years of treatment or so-called treatment by a gastroenterologist, etc. But no relief. And I'm not saying this is easy to handle because this takes time, like anything else. And this takes a longer time because there is a lot of trial and error. Number one, because while we follow certain principles like low FODMAP and all of that, which is in evidence-based nutrition, what foods in low, because the gut microbiome is so unique, doc, what may suit you will not suit me, even if it is low FODMAP. I have no formula to replicate. There's no
universal protocol, yeah.
There is no. If egg whites will suit you, egg will not suit somebody. Okay. If Greek yogurt will suit somebody, Greek yogurt will not suit somebody. Okay, so it's so much of trial and error, and that's the only way to do it. In most cases, IBS patients, now this is a good one, they either anxiety has triggered it or this will trigger anxiety. In most cases, at least 50% of IBS patients have mental health issues, which means, so in general, IBS is not only a linear approach. A lot of things. So food, first trial and error. So healing of the gut. And there are many things we do. We can discuss that. Fixing circadian rhythm. This is a big one. Fixing circadian rhythm. So sleeping on time, waking up on... This plays a very important role. And keeping at least 2 to 2.5, 3 hours gap between lunch and dinner. Eating on time. Some form of de-stressing. And body movement. What people don't know, that your gut bacteria can proliferate for the better, irrespective of the diet, if you give it movement. It has that ability, and that movement is your choice. It can be some form of yoga. It can be as something as simple as walking. It can be strength training. All of this change your gut bacteria, and also all your hormones. Something like serotonin, is produced majorly in the gut, so you feel better. And of course, the other thing that we say, simple practices like, don't immediately sit down or lie down, don't become horizontal on the bed while eating. So IBS requires, and in many cases, it does require some therapy. Because...
You mean mental health therapy?
Yes. Yes, counseling. Because sometimes there are so many other areas of life that contribute. It all becomes like a mesh. I'll tell you what happens. If you've had bad gut health, and I had a case like this from Dubai. The guy was so tired and scared of eating anything that he would have a panic attack every night, not knowing what his morning is going to look like. Am I going to have diarrhea? Am I going to have constipation? If he had to take a flight to, say, go to some other city in Middle East, he would be on anxiety medication, because he would need to know, can he have at least 3 bathrooms on the way? This then translates to anxiety in all areas of life. And sometimes only a nutritionist, while we work on all of this, may not help. You may need a psychologist's help, calming down techniques. What do you do? Because both trigger each other.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I'll give you my point
So
of
this
view.
is where, so these are the issues I see. And typically, again, in most of these people, it is abuse of food, abuse of circadian rhythm. In many cases, may not be their fault. Eating street food, big reason to get H. pylori infection in our country. Eating street food, eating raw foods outside like cut fruit, juices, all of that. In some cases, going on juicing protocols without understanding what juice you are taking in what quantity, like generally drinking lauki juice and kale juice and ashgore juice for long periods of time, staying on a raw foods diet
without knowing
what you're doing, what food you're taking, where is the origin. Because especially in India, raw produce, it'll develop bacteria quickly, and you don't know the pesticide.
Humidity is very high.
So some are these cases, some are these cases, and the statistics say that 1 in 10 people who get a stomach bug or a simple infection like out of eating outside, that over a period of 6 months turns to IBS. So many cases are, I went here, I ate this, I got H. pylori, I did 2 rounds of treatment. After that, my life has never been the same. Or it could be, I went to this area, I drank all of this water and this happened, and then I could never recover. Last case of IBS, antibiotic abuse. I'm sure you would have seen.
Big problem.
Big one in India. Okay.
And now we have antimicrobial resistance.
Exactly. So popping some Augmentin 650 and, self-medication in India for everything. Like a cold doesn't need, a small cold doesn't need antibiotics like now. Even a slight irritation of the throat, wait for 3 to 5 days, see a doctor. Are you getting repeated? From day 1, they will start popping antibiotics for everything. They give children antibiotics. So being on constant round, many cases of these also come. Like I kept falling ill, I kept taking antibiotics. Now my gut is like screwed. These are all of this, yeah, and all equally come. Like all of this. IBD is slightly smaller, and I see IBD more in men and young men. I've somehow not seen IBD in women a lot. But IBS is across the spectrum.
I see a lot of patients with IBS just, I wouldn't say totally reversed, but when they come for Panchakarma, I tell them, no, Panchakarma is not what they need. Because intense treatments can sometimes backfire. I just put them through the very de-stressing therapies. Like fix their sleep first. And we have treatments that calms their nervous system. Like we call it, balancing the vata. And that itself has minimized their condition a lot.
Yeah.
And without, and also making sure the food they are eating on time. And usually, as you said, most of the IBS patients, they would have gone to a lot of doctors.
They're tired.
And they're
They give up.
Frustrated souls.
Frustrated. Yeah. Yeah.
And they would have been a PhD holder in nutrition by the time they come to us. And they're half doctors and half nutritionists.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I tell them, okay, let's just try this one part, which you did not try.
Yeah.
Which is correcting your sleep and correcting your stress coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And I've seen that has done more miracles than any nutritional advice when it comes to IBS.
Yes.
But I'm not discounting what nutrition can do.
No, that's why I told you, this sleep and stress are so connected to each other, which is why I said IBS is never a singular protocol. For nutrition aside, these people normally, they're very high strung, or they are all the time in that anxiety mode, or all the time they are thinking about something. So when they come to, let's say, a retreat or a facility for 5 days, you give them the ambience and you have those like some massages and therapies that basically calms you down. If your brain is calm, your gut will be calm, and vice versa.
Exactly.
So then at least the patient or the client is receptive for the next conversation. Hey, what do we do with your food now? Otherwise, they get very touchy about food. Like small changes, they will not agree. I completely understand that.
And I feel many IBS we treated, there are 2 treatments. One is Shirodhara, and we have a treatment called Nabi Vasti, where we pour oil on the abdomen and hold it.
Okay.
It is known to really calm that person. And just with these 2 treatments and putting them to sleep on time and no distractions at night, I've seen that does a lot of good reversals.
So I was, there's a client from Sydney who was talking to me. She was going on chatting with me for 4 months before she signed up. Okay. I said, you sign up because I understand the anxiety also. See, unfortunately, there are no guarantees, right? Nobody knows the world of gut microbiome. Even microbiome experts don't. So we follow some methods that we think with empirical evidence works. She signed up for a program and I told her, so I was after the food, so she has, her body swells up, her rings become tight. There is constant bloating, once in 3 days constipation. I told her, you're saying you don't have constipation every day, but you're saying twice a week you have constipation. I asked her that twice a week when you have constipation in a month, are you hurried in the morning? She said, yes, those are the days I go to work. And I have 2 young children. I have no time when I'm hurried in the morning and when I have to wake up, I have to arrange meals for my kids. My husband is going, I have to cook, I have to reach this deadline. That day, because of the stress, I'm constipated. I mean, can you see the mind of a person, how powerful, just because she is hurried in the morning, that day she will not be able to go. I said, listen, let's solve this. It's very simple. That day, wake up half an hour early, I said, and do meal prep prior. Before you wake up the kids, give yourself half an hour time. So that your routine, and I don't know if you do that here in Ayurveda, but what I do is try and have a very set routine in the morning where your bowels become predictable. We have now been practicing that and I'll hear feedback. So that's how powerful your mind is. She's rushed, she's panicked, she has to look after kids. And those are the days when there is constipation.
And body loves routine.
Body loves routine. And funnily, there is a lot of chat about longevity, blue zones. Everybody's splitting straws, doctor. Oh, their diet is vegetarian. Oh, they do this. Oh, no, actually they walk. But most of the blue zones, if you look at whether it is the Okinawans or whether it is Sardinia and the Greece, so they've identified those blue zones, right? Those people have been doing the same thing that they have been doing for 40, 50, 60 years effortlessly. And even if you look at some of our elders who have been healthy, that is power of routine. They will do the same thing every day and it will be non-negotiable. Wake up at 4, it doesn't matter if it is Christmas, Diwali, Sunday, they will wake up at 4. Go for a walk, they will go for a walk. First meal done by 9 o'clock, done by 9 o'clock. That's the power of routine.
If you look at some of the conditions of hormonal disorders, I see that a lot in flight attendants, especially those who are taking the long haul flights. Because they're jet lagged and the routine is disrupted.
Completely off. Yeah.
And what I see, some of the flight attendants who keep very healthy, they have to take extra effort to balance it out.
Yes.
So somewhere, whatever you're disrupting, you need to make sure that you are doing the penance to correct it.
Yeah. I think I sometimes can't imagine a flight attendant's and their life, because I take 2 flights consecutive, my stomach is bloated, and I am somebody, unless it's a very long flight like outside of India, I have a rule, I don't eat on the flight. It's been 8-9 years. I will not, but for water, I don't eat on the flight, because I have repeatedly noticed there is something going on when you eat at 30,000 feet. After that, your stomach is bloated, you don't feel good. It takes a full 24-hour reset.
Sometimes 48.
Sometimes 48. Yeah. So there are, I think the gut, you have to be very careful. So IBS is this, but yes, like I said, a mix of these protocols. In most cases, 70% of the time, there will be some chronic cases where it's still unpredictable and they may need a considerable long-term approach.
It's so interesting that even though I want to discuss about nutrition and we are discussing about circadian rhythm and the stress coping mechanism and having time for yourself and having the routine.
Yeah.
Because people miss out on this. I mean, today when you go to a dietitian, you think that it's all about counting your calories and making sure you have this much protein, this much this. But we need to understand every car has a different approach how it's going to process the fuel.
Yeah.
And on one hand, you have the fuel. On one hand, how the body is going to take care of that fuel.
Yes.
We need to work on these two together.
In IBS, I can count any amount of calories and do whatever magic to the protein and keep telling you, no, eat that protein, eat 1 gram. If the person doesn't get some respite from the symptom, if the mind doesn't calm down, if they don't feel at rest, the body will not take that food only. It will just reject it. So all that later, even now, you don't even need to have IBS, doctor. You have a stressful phase for even 1 or 2 days. See how your eating pattern changes.
Absolutely.
There are 2 kinds of people. Person number 1 is who will go towards food. That anxiety will make you eat everything that will give you that dopamine hit to reward. And person number 2 is somebody like me who will completely quit eating. When they have stress, will not eat for 18 hours, 19 hours, will forget food, will just not do anything. That is also problematic. Nutrition is the calories. We'll come to that, I'm sure. One aspect, but you have to create the right environment for that to work for you.
Absolutely. Now, we spoke about IBS, we spoke about PCOS. I thought I just missed out and I want to go a little more deep on this topic of hypothyroidism. Will that also come, would you say, following the same protocol will have a good respect, or would you say there is something else to hypothyroidism?
No, mostly. So we see, first and foremost, mostly we see hypothyroidism, very few in men we see, largely in women, right? And typically it is connected to 3 things, okay? 1, if you have PCOS, we see that condition go hand in hand, okay? Second, we see hypothyroidism with gut trouble. With gut trouble, we actually see disruption of multiple hormones, okay? And then we see hypothyroidism that has come out of obesity. So especially where it is like 20 years of obesity, 30 years of obesity, and you've done nothing to address that, where the dosage is, let's say, started at 20 mcg, now you're sitting at 125 mcg. Now, 20, 30 years of obesity and a sluggish hypothyroidism may not be able to be fully reversed with 0 medication. But in most cases, ultimately, these are all lifestyle diseases. So in most cases, it is with weight. You focus on the weight, you bring back, because your endocrine system responds to fat in a very different way. Fat is not just fat sitting in your body. Fat is an endocrine organ. Like more fat in your body changes the hormonal profile of your body. Right? Your muscle cells will become insulin resistant. Your thyroid will become sluggish. You'll have more estrogen dominance in your body. There are lots of things that happen when you gain fat. So the first thing is that if you are overweight and obese, you handle that. So as you do that, we see like everything, you catch it early, the better the chances of reversal. Little later, remission. Sometimes you still need it's just like diabetes. Right? I catch the onset of type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, you will be as good as new.
Yeah.
We don't even call it diabetes. Reversal is completely possible. 5, 7, 8 years, depending upon how much you've abused your body, where your beta cells are at, what your C-peptide test is showing, we can handle it. 20 years plus of abuse, maybe not all the time. But still we can handle your blood glucose levels where you're not getting progressively worse. You're not going into kidney damage. You're not going into nephropathy, neuropathy, all of that, right? Diabetic. So to come to answer your question, the quicker you act on it. But the problem is people, until
it becomes really bad.
Yes. Until it comes to the stage where all your... And problem is certain things have become accepted as normal. I have acidity. It's normal. No, it's not normal. I'm having hypothyroidism. All women have. PCOD. Oh, everybody. And I hate how they portray it on reels and all. I'm a PCOD girly. What is this? What do you mean I'm a diabetics boy? Like what are we? I understand you want somebody with PCOS or PCOD to be inclusive, but there is nothing cute about this. Normalized about it. The amount of people I have seen in trains, in flights, in and around my circle for the years to carry antacids like Gelusil with them when they travel because they have constant heartburn, it's normalized. So coming back, you take action early, it is better. But even in diabetes, nobody acts when your HbA1c is 5.9. It becomes 8. And that too when they'll see, oh, my vision is not okay. I had a recent case of somebody coming, this was a friend actually, Dr. Vignesh. The guy, mid-30s guy, was getting recurrent boils. Like pus-driven boils, which in 2-3 days was aggravated so much it was bursting and he was getting high-grade fever. And my friend was discussing, I said, immediately, fasting insulin test the blood sugars. Fasting insulin is 55 and blood sugar is 8.5. I said, obviously, there is high blood sugar, which is like little skin abnormalities are manifesting into this. Now, last 6 months under a strict protocol, walking, has taken some B12, vitamin D B12 was low. Suddenly there are no boils. Of course, the diabetes is still there. They have to work on it. But the boils are not appearing like that. So I'm saying you have to, here, unless the blood report and the doctor will say, now it is do or die, you won't take action. And even after that, in some cases like hypothyroidism, because it doesn't manifest into anything, right? Like you can't see it immediately. At least diabetes, you know, your sugar is going out of toss and all of that. In hypothyroidism, some hair will fall, you'll gain some weight and life goes on.
In Ayurveda, we have this statement in Sanskrit, Chayam eva jaya dosham. If I have to translate in a simple language, kill the monster when it is young.
Correct. Rai ko pahad, don't let the mole become a monster, na? Because the beauty of non-communicable diseases or all of these lifestyle diseases, they are so reversible. And it is in that, and that is forming 70% of disease burden today.
And that's the sad part.
That is the sad part, right? And I tell people, like, what an amazing organ your liver is. Till you completely, if you don't abuse it beyond a point, it regenerates itself in 6 to 8 months, even in cases of alcohol abuse. So respect that body a little bit. Give it a chance till it completely says, now I'm done. And you don't have to do a lot. This is, again, I keep telling people, it is simple things done 80% of the time. 20% of the time, the body gives you leeway. It's not like I don't eat a cake. It's not like you don't eat a Maggie. It's not like I am sweating 2 hours in the gym like some athlete every day. No, I do it 2 to 3 days a week. I try and stay active. Last 1.5 years, I have not had proper sleep. That's because mother was unwell. But now I am correcting back my... So I'm saying there will always be periods when life gets demanding, but 80%, focus on that 80%, 20%. The body itself will give you leeway. That's how resilient the human body is.
Sometimes you see the other way where you have to be 100% and that gives you...
That is another anxiety. Okay. Trying to hyper optimize every part of your health will give you mental health issues, because I'm sure you come from and you know more, because the entire Ayurveda way of life is holistic and balance at any given point in time. Not too much happiness, not too much sadness, not too much indulgence, not too much deprivation, not too much high, not too much low. That is the law of nature, including the law of your body. You try and do something as extreme as constant cold plunge, it will create a problem so that you withdraw and come here.
Yeah.
You try and all the time hyper obsess over clean eating and whatever. It will give you some symptom where it will say, enough now. Maybe just be normal. So there is something called as that homeostasis, which you try and lose excessive amount of weight than you're supposed to, your hormone balance changes. And we've seen that more with women. If you keep pushing weight loss beyond a certain body fat percentage, your menstrual cycle goes for a toss. Your moods go for a toss.
In men, it leads to infertility problems.
Yes. So whoever is aiming all this to be six-pack, shredded and all, very nice, but constantly trying to stay in single-digit fat percentage numbers,
it's not healthy.
It's not healthy. It's
and
done for a sport. It's not sustainable. Fat is also protective. Please understand. So there is a bit of a balance.
I was having a conversation with a friend and he was having pizza. And he's saying, oh, I love my fat. Imagine if there is a famine. I need some resources. Like he was making a joke. But
yeah.
I'm just relating to how people... connect things.
Yeah. But the famine is today never coming.
Yeah.
You know, we don't go 5 hours without food. Yeah. Forget about a famine. So yes, hypothyroidism is that. Like I said, catch everything early. It is possible.
So Sangeeta ji, thank you so much for this conversation. Now, I think I would like to have few more conversations with you. But before then, thank you so much for this. And I really hope people who listen to this will get some gyan to understand what not to do, what to do, and also maybe...
And simple actionable steps.
Yes.
You know, you give people too many things to do. I understand there's family, there's work, there's commute. But these are all, whatever we discussed are very simple things, you know, that can also go, that can go a long time. Like once it becomes a kind of a autopilot mode, these are very simple things you can do. So my pleasure. I hope it helps.
Thank you so much.